Welcome back, everyone. This is Angel Miller with Phalanx, and that's phalx.com. A pretty easy URL to remember. And this is our fourth podcast for the site, and this evening we're going to be speaking with Andrei Znamenski, a historian and author of Red Shambhala, Magic, Prophecy, and Geopolitics in the Heart of Asia, as well as The Beauty of the Primitive, Indigenous Shamanism and Western Imagination. And it's a slightly longer podcast than the last few that we've done, but I decided not to edit it down because it's on a subject that I think is going to interest a lot of people, and certainly interests me, and isn't discussed at a serious level that often. Andrei Znamenski, thank you for joining us. You are the author of The Beauty of the Primitive and Red Shambhala, which is a title that some listeners might know. But we're actually going to focus on the beauty of the primitive today, which was your first book, and explores shamanism and paganism and neo-paganism and figures such as Mircea Eliade. So perhaps first of all, you could just give us a little bit about your background and how you came to write The Beauty of the Primitive.
Well, I did my doctoral degree in Ohio, and I was doing research among American Indians in Alaska in 1995, 1996. Each summer I went there. It's like deep in the bush. That's how they say in Alaska. It's a lake. And the topic I was researching was Native Americans and Greek Orthodox Church. So I was trying to look into how local American Indians mixed shamanism and Christianity. Yeah. Okay, I found that some of them converted to Greek Orthodox Christianity. It was a kind of good alternative for them, an alternative to American Protestantism. Okay, so
really?
They wanted to say, so don't touch us, so we are Christians, because such religions like Catholicism or Greek Orthodox looked to them more indigenous, so they could draw the links because there was ritualism, there was beauty,
right.
Beauty of the ceremonies.
Yeah. And what period was this?
It was the very end of the 19th century.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm. And I remember in 1996, in summer, I was there, and I was completing my trip and was about to fly home, and I stayed a couple of days in Anchorage, and I went to a local bookstore. I think it was Barnes & Noble, and I was browsing some books, the New Age section, the Native American section, and suddenly I started spontaneously a conversation with a guy and a girl. He was a realtor from Anchorage, and she was a nurse from University of Alaska Hospital. Mm-hmm. And I found out that they were so much interested in shamanism. So that was my first meeting with this Westerners who who were kind of plunging themselves into shamanism, trying to learn about it. And in fact, they confronted me. They said that, so why don't you learn authentic indigenous shamanism? Why are you interested in this mixture of Christianity and shamanism? So you shouldn't do it. So, and that's what kind of puzzled me at first. So why do we have people like these folks who are extremely open-minded? That's what's interesting about them. They struck very open-minded people who are open to other religions. They're definitely not bigots. Not closed-minded. Mm-hmm. So they wanted to explore all traditions, and of course, since they were coming from Christian tradition, that's where they grew up. They wanted to explore non-Christian traditions. And so I started looking into this. Then I met people like them more and more. And eventually I realized that it was the whole counterculture. See, before I was kind of vaguely aware of this, but didn't look into this,
Yeah.
And when I started looking into this more and more, so I was interested so much in this. So I decided to write this book, The Beauty of the Primitive, Shamanism and Western Imagination. So instead of going to Alaska to live and learn with Native Americans, I started going to California, to Malibu, Berkeley, and Oregon, and all this. Mm-hmm. So my field trips shifted to different areas, and then I met Michael Harner, who was the founder of the Foundation for Shamanic Studies. I'm a historian. Okay, that's by training.
Yeah, of course.
So, and I decided to look into this. Into the origin of this interest. And of course I found out that much of this interest goes back to the 1960s, okay? But then I decided to go beyond the 1960s. So I was interested in how this expression shamanism was introduced into Western humanities, into Western literature. So I...
Right. Because it's a Siberian term, correct?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And that's how we go to this origin of this metaphor of shamanism, which had originated from Siberia. And I remember when we were preparing for this interview, you said that you are interested in learning about this, how it was introduced into usage. Is it correct?
Oh yes, absolutely. Yeah, I'm wondering how it did come to be used in Western academia.
It was first. It was introduced by German, the German-speaking travelers to Siberia in Russia.
Ah.
They didn't have enough educated cadre to explore these vast areas. So they hired foreigners, and predominantly German-speaking people, or from Netherlands, from Sweden, and these people traveled widely in Siberia. And since they were educated people, so they left records. A lot of 70% of records about Siberia had been written by Western Europeans, predominantly German-speaking people.
Really? And what time was this?
It was the second half of the 1700s.
Oh, really? Wow, that's quite early.
Yeah, there were the travelers, like I would like to name Gerhard Müller, okay, and Paulus, Georgi. Okay, so these travelers, they describe the spiritual practitioners of the Siberian indigenous people as shamans. And in fact, the word itself, it's not a European word, so that is why I giggle when I see the sites initiated by a couple of years ago. I noticed a site launched by a lady who said, we don't need the word shaman because it's a masculine term,
Oh, really?
We need feminine term, shamanka, so she tried to kind of purge this expression of patriarchal traits, But,
oh boy!
I'm giggling when I see it because it's the word shaman has nothing to do with man,
Right, I would think not.
It's an indigenous word that comes from Evenki language. Evenki, it's a group of indigenous people who scattered all over Siberia. By the way, in old records, to make it clear, in old records, German records, Russian records, and English literature, in old English literature, these Evenki are known as Tungus. Okay?
Oh, okay, yeah.
So that's how they are mostly referred to.
Yeah.
In their indigenous language, shaman means an excited one, an agitated one.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm. And since these, I was trying to pinpoint why their word, their definition had been chosen by the German-speaking travelers.
Yeah.
But why not other native definitions? And I realized simply there are two factors here. Because Evenki, they were scattered all over central Siberia, all over. And the second thing, they had a beautiful, picturesque clothing. Okay, so it impressed travelers. So I guess that's the reason they were chosen. It's like, imagine you compare, let's say, Plains Indians, Lakota. This proud bison feathers and these eagle profiles, dream catchers, with some California Indians or Iroquois Indians who had mohawks or who didn't ride horses. So in this romantic Western imagination, so some indigenous people have more kind of romantic appeal than the others.
Yeah.
That was the reason, that's there's nothing else there, and that's how Siberian Tongass shamans shaman was chosen as a label. And in fact, until the 1960s, it wasn't widely used in Western literature.
Oh, is that right?
Not at all. So we have a bunch of these definitions. The most widespread was medicine man and medicine.
Yeah, of course, that's right.
That's it.
Yeah.
Even in some Anglo literature on Siberia, or a witch doctor.
Yeah. Right. I mean,
sorcerer.
I remember that growing up from the movies, but I guess it was pretty widespread. Was it used in academia, those sorts of terms, or?
They used the most medicine man, medicine woman.
Okay.
And sometimes they used, even in academia, in old 1700s and early 1800s, they used such words as spiritual jugglers,
Oh, really? Wow. Okay. And so, how would you define shamanism? What is it exactly?
Shamanism, I define it as a spiritual practitioner in let's say, tribal polytheistic religions, who enters an altered state of conscience to communicate with spirits,
right,
in order to receive the information about what the future prospects, about the ongoing life, to kind of give an advice to his fellow clans, women, what to do in future, Although some anthropologists, they argued that altered state, it's not a necessary mark of a shaman, But the majority of writers and anthropologists believe that that's what it's all about, the shamanism. So it's about entering an altered state. It doesn't mean that you have to wait for this spontaneously. So you have to plunge yourself. That's what.
Right, and that's usually done by sort of drumming and ritual dance and maybe some kind of narcotic substances a lot of the time. Correct?
Yeah, there was a debate, by the way, in literature, in shamanism literature, and a debate that was linked to somehow to indigenous field records collected by anthropologists about what type of shamanism was more potent,
Oh, really?
Was induced by drumming, or the one that was induced by drugs, and in fact, in Siberia, I saw it in records, in traditional shamanism, in the northeastern Siberia, in southern Siberia, there was an assumption that powerful shamans, they didn't need an alcohol or some kind of magic mushrooms. Okay, you could use sounds.
Okay.
And of course, such people like Michael Harner, who was basically one of the first spearheads of Western shamanism. So of course he jumped on this opportunity because when the U.S. Congress made drugs illegal in the early 1970s.
Yeah.
So he actually said, look, and everything is fine, because drugs essentially don't help, it's like an artificial booster. So you
right.
drumming. So that is why people like Michael Harner, they propagate drumming as a safe way to induce an altered state.
And do you have any thoughts about the sort of, I think we could call it New Age scene, where there seems to be a real fixation on taking sort of sacred plants which are narcotic and having some kind of hallucinogenic experience? But personally, I'm not really in favor of it. But do you have any thoughts about that?
I think it's impossible to generalize here. For instance, if you go to Latin America, to Peru and Amazon rainforest, you will see that the major tool of entering the altered state is one of the major tools in ayahuasca.
Yeah.
It's kind of jungle vine that was kind of prepared as a brew and people drink it. And that's how local shamans induce the visions. And they don't consider it some kind of weak booster or like artificial booster. So that's a major booster for them.
Yeah.
If you go to Siberia, for instance, among the majority of tribal groups, they believe in drumming. Okay,
right.
But it doesn't mean that I can pinpoint other groups who actually used fly agaric mushrooms, or in combination. You know, there are some shamans who actually use drumming and vodka. You know, alcohol.
Oh, really? Mm-hmm. Is that from Russia?
Yeah, from southern Siberia.
Okay.
It's everything is so individual.
Yeah.
So to generalize, I met in Altai. Altai, it's southern Siberia. In 2003, I met a shaman who had to shamanize under communism, and the drumming was forbidden. The drums were confiscated and burned.
Oh, really?
So instead, he used the rim and as a drum, like a symbolic, a virtual drum.
Oh, okay.
And he used it as in his hands silently. Okay.
Oh.
He manipulated it, like creating this impression it was a sound effect, although it was a silent effect. You know, like I say, imagine a silent movie. You know.
Right. So
if, Soviets could hear the sound of the drum. You know, the secret police could easily kind of penalize him.
Wow, that's quite something.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, actually, when I was talking about the use of narcotics, actually, ayahuasca is the one that comes to mind. I was actually thinking more about young Western people that have just got into sort of New Age stuff, and that seems to be a big thing for them at the moment.
Yeah, and right now it's an established industry.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
A colleague of mine from South Africa, I forgot his name. He recently wrote a book where he talks about neoliberalism and shamanism. So he actually argues how the shamanic industry in countries like Peru, Ecuador, some areas of Brazil became a prosperous industry. So there were some indigenous shamans, you know, who cater to the interests of Western visitors. They offer them shamanic tours.
Yeah, that's right.
So supply and demand, and a lot of Western people are attracted by this. Definitely an exotic environment, to see a little bit of Inca ruins, you know, to go and try jungle vines. You know. So it's, and I don't think it's, as long as it doesn't harm you, I don't think it's a bad thing, because people write about it as an accusatory tone, you know, but I don't think that it's, why should we accuse these people, you know, if some people say it's not traditional. That's what is questionable for me. They always try to stamp something, new thing comes up, like for instance, Michael Harner's shamanism. It's traditional because Michael Harner wants to create this like ultimate skeleton of shamanism, you know. So because Michael Harner goes from Mircea Eliade concept of shamanism. We will talk about it later. So he tries to pinpoint the blueprint of world shamanism, you know.
Right.
For me, it might not make sense. But for other people, it might make sense, and he has thousands of people who apprentice at his Foundation for Shamanic Studies. You know, it's pretty natural, I think. You know, there's nothing strange about it. Or about these shamanic tours in Amazon rainforest. You know, if thousands of new so-called New Age seekers from the West like it, and they found it useful. So why not? The both sides are satisfied, and I don't want to condemn it. So maybe this is the new tradition that is being born.
Yeah, good point. And and so it seems like from say Mircea Eliade to Michael Harner, there's been quite a growth in our understanding of shamanism, and some ups and downs maybe, and some turns into different directions. But how do you think it is the study has evolved in the West?
So we need definitely to talk about Mircea Eliade.
Yeah.
He is, you see, in the 1960s, when this interest in shamanism was on the rise in 1970s, there were hardly any user-friendly books. Or
right.
This way, there were hardly any non-Eurocentric books that treat shamanism as a valid spiritual practice. Okay, because what we had before Mircea Eliade came to the picture, we had a bunch of books and articles on shamanism that had been written from psychoanalytical viewpoint.
Ah, okay. Really?
And in this case, of course, in the 1940s, 1950s, shamans frequently were labeled as crazy, as mentally ill,
Right.
So it's like a signature approach of psychoanalysis, So it's like you were every patient, So it was a cultural fad, What could you do? We have right now our own fads right now, and so there were hardly any valid and reliable accounts before Mircea Eliade came to the picture. So that's why a lot of people were hooked on his book. Okay, and another attractive feature of his book is that he tried to describe shamanism in different areas. Of course, Siberia, Inner Asia, Tibet, and North America, of course. We see North America and Siberia considered as areas of a kind of classical shamanism. Okay, but he also wrote about African spiritual practice.
Yeah, that's right.
Nordic spiritual practices.
Yeah,
Latin American spiritual practices, and for the first time, essentially, he labeled them as shamanism. That's what he did. And interesting, in introduction to his book, he writes that essentially he revolts against this Eurocentric vision of shamanism. So that is why I kind of don't understand these accusations against Eliade. There are some other things about him, we might talk about it. But this particular case, Eliade and indigenous religions, he was just the opposite. He was inviting Westerners to not to embrace them, but at least to explore them. Okay?
Right, yeah.
He said, in fact, he literally said that religion set in stone and trees and mountains not less valid than religion set in books or in kind of clay tablets,
Yeah.
That's what he writes in his introduction. And a lot of spiritual seekers read his book.
I read it. I read it when I was 17, actually.
Really? Oh.
Yeah.
And in fact, he uses a Siberian. There was a description by a German anthropologist, 19th century anthropologist, of a detailed description of Siberian shamanic session. So Eliade used it as a kind of blueprint of a classical shamanic session.
Yeah, and so perhaps you could just tell us a little bit more about Mircea Eliade, and who was he, and why is he controversial?
I read his shamanism book, and pretty much that was it.
Yeah.
But then I read a few other works that criticized him, blaming him in anti-Semitism and fascism. Yeah, he's blamed in this. And so I decided to explore, and then I realized that he was not actually, he didn't consider himself an expert in shamanism, and he was not. He was not. an expert in shamanism, but he became an expert because he immersed into literature. He read for many years, and he wrote this book. So it's for that time it was a good record. It was the most complete.
Yeah.
But what puzzled me at first, why Eliade, who was specialized in Hindu religions, or so to speak, in Oriental religions, why suddenly he became drawn to shamanism? And I couldn't answer this question at first.
Yeah.
And recently, like 2008, 2009, I finally realized I understood why he wrote this book and what was so. He invested a lot of time.
Yes.
He hardly had any money, and he wrote this book. He published this book in 1947 or 1952, something like this. I think it's 1947, in the post-war Europe. And he lived this in miserable conditions, didn't have enough money. What drew him to the shamanism? And then finally dawned on me, after I read the book by Mark Sedgwick from Denmark, religious scholar who wrote this famous book, Revolt Against the Modern World.
Yeah.
Where he writes about Eliade, and then it dawned on me, there should be something. I didn't know anything about traditionalism, so I didn't link traditionalism and Eliade at first because I didn't know too much.
Okay, yeah.
And I realized that he was one of the spearheads of traditionalism.
Right, that's right, yeah.
Julius Evola and Sion and others. Okay, so finally, when I read his other books about religion, the origin of religion, the cosmic cycles, and all these things, I see that he tried to send us a message of how to retrieve authentic religion. Okay, because the whole mark of traditionalism is to get to the roots of religious tradition. Okay.
Right, that's right. Yeah.
How are we going to excavate or retrieve the most reliable, the most ancient roots of tradition, spiritual tradition?
Yeah.
And that is why this at first there was an interest in Hinduism, Buddhism, and other non-European religions who had been who had been launched far before Abrahamic religions started.
Right, exactly. Yeah, because traditionalism believes there was a primordial religion.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then the later religions are a sort of pale reflection of it in a certain sense.
Precisely. And that is why it was logical for Mircea Eliade, although he was an expert in Hinduism and to go further beyond this. So let's look at this kind of world spiritual archetype. What was at the dawn of human history? Okay.
Yeah.
So that is why the interest in shamanism was very natural. So he goes beyond this most ancient traditions. He goes to the roots of, like you said, to the very roots of the primordial tradition. Okay.
Right, exactly.
It's constituted shamanism. It's like a spiritual foundation that served as this spiritual archetype, spiritual blueprint for other major religions that started later, much later. That is why he wrote this book. Yeah, that's my argument.
And so how do you feel that the shamanism, and whether in its more popular forms or in its more serious understanding, how do you think that relates to the emergence of, say, neo-paganism in the West and our fascination with, say, Native American culture, but then also sort of Wicca and neo-paganism and this whole revival of sort of ancient or allegedly ancient traditions?
It's another interesting connection here because, see, the original interest in shamanism was an interest in non-European
right
It was, you studied 1960s, 1970s, you know that was the whole tide of interests.
Yeah.
People went to Oriental countries, people like hippies went to Native American reservations, they're trying to learn about tribal wisdom, so to speak, Oriental wisdom. And then there was, it's again my understanding that then there was this slowly growing realization that you don't need to go to the other side, okay? Because you have to look into your own tradition. So that is why, and there was another reason, because some of these indigenous groups, they kind of questioned this Western spiritual seekers' efforts to come to them, live with them, and kind of take their wisdom.
Right.
There was this issue like Native Americans, who lost, many Native American groups, they lost their culture, okay?
Yeah.
So they became very itchy, very sensitive about it. So they were so possessive and protective, So if some Caucasian people were coming to Indian reservation and trying to say, we're going to learn spiritual wisdom, who the hell you are, It was an always issue. Some Native Americans even argued, you're going to steal our spirituality, okay? Of course, not everybody. There were others who tried to cash on this new interest, But the bottom line was that both sides, especially in the United States, Native Americans and non-Native Americans, they felt insecure about it. See, Native Americans felt insecure because some strangers were coming, trying to take their spirituality.
Yeah.
The Caucasian spiritual seekers equally felt uncomfortable about this. Where is this red line?
Right, right.
If we are going to borrow dream catchers, some kind of bison images, eagle images, or some kind of feathers, so is it going to be a theft of Native American spirituality? So then eventually there was this realization when you read magazine, Shaman Drum, there's one of the major magazines in the field.
Okay.
The spiritual practitioners who learn about shamanism, they read this magazine, Shaman Drum. So if you read this magazine, so you will see that throughout the time there was this growing realization that we need to go back to our European roots, okay? And that's when in 1980s, 1990s, there was this trend to go to Nordic spirituality, Celtic spirituality, okay? But the interesting thing, they use the word shaman, okay? Because shaman was fulfilling the same role in the European setting, okay?
Yeah.
So by trying to invent new rituals, of course, they essentially invented new rituals because they read Viking sagas or some kind of scarce records left by early Christian missionaries about these Nordic pagans who didn't want to convert it. So they read these books and they were making up these new rituals, which was fine because that's how traditions, all traditions are created. They are made up and then they become traditions. But they didn't want to use this vocabulary, that accusatory vocabulary that had been used by either missionaries or early travelers, like spiritual jugglers. And they started using Siberian expression shamanism to label their own European practitioners. Okay, that's why we have this. I remember a book was published in 1993 about the title was interesting: Anglo-Saxon Shamanic Apprentice, or Nordic Shamanism.
Oh, really?
Shamanism. So you will see a bunch of these titles, So the word shamanism acquired this user-friendly features. It's native, it's indigenous, it's tribal, and we can apply it everywhere, so in all settings.
Yeah. And I guess it also probably comes from Eliade, who, as you mentioned, looked at shamanism as essentially a worldwide phenomenon. So. Yeah.
Eliade was convinced that, he pioneered the field of religious studies.
Yeah.
He was one of the first chairs of religious studies at the University of Chicago. And And he was a spiritual man himself, he was a skeptic, definitely, because he was, some people blame him that he was a Greek Orthodox bigot because originally coming from Romania, it's Greek Orthodox.
Yeah.
So, but reading his books, I don't think that he is a Greek Orthodox. He is pretty much
right now.
Ecumenical. He reminds me one of this current, for instance, so-called New Age seekers or just spiritual seekers who grew up in Christian tradition, but who want to be ecumenical, and that is why they borrowed from all traditions. That's what Eliade did,
Yeah, because I mean, all of his books, or most of them anyway, seem to focus on this sort of universal phenomenon, really.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, and as well, he's actually quite critical of the West, or at least of the modern West, and the state of its spiritual traditions, and what is possibly attainable in the West. Yeah.
Yes, he's critical of the West, and in fact, I have to mention something, to make that kind of picture complete, the record straight, that his anti-Western sentiments go back to his traditionalism.
Right, yeah, of course, yeah.
1920s, 1930s, because when he was in Romania, of course, he was participant of the soil spirituality, traditional spirituality.
Yeah.
And of course, he was like everybody, like many so-called indigenous Romanian, Polish, Bulgarian, Austrian intellectuals. He shared anti-Semitism. Because again, we have to admit this. We have to mention this. Without this, the record wouldn't be complete. Because look, he, like many intellectuals at that time, he viewed that this traditions of these countries, like Romania, Austria, Poland, they were under threat from so-called cosmopolitan tide. That's the reason why he partook of this anti-Semitism, because he published some articles where in 1920s, 1930s, with this traits of anti-Semitism, and he was very ashamed about it.
Oh, really? Okay.
Came to the United States because he could not operate freely, because it always was like a baggage he inherited. It's the reference point for what he was doing in 1920s, 1930s, before Holocaust. The reference was already Holocaust. Okay.
Yeah.
If you go back before Holocaust, before 1939 Europe, you will see that the reference point was different. The reference point was for many intellectuals on the left and on the right was the Great Depression. Okay.
Right.
Was this nationalism, growing nationalism that was before caged in these empires, Russian Empire, Austria-Hungary, so nationalism, Romanian, Bulgarian, Polish nationalism, they were pretty aggressive, I would say.
Yeah, and from what I know as well, that even on the left, socialism was often pretty tolerant of anti-Semitism as well. So it wasn't especially a right-wing thing. So.
Mm-hmm. And he, that Eliade, he actually he was dreaming about getting a Nobel Prize, and he wanted to be acknowledged. And when it was revealed that he was part of this movement of traditionalism, and he was actually a member of Iron Guard,
right?
Romanian Iron Guard, it's a movement on the right to shield as a Greek Orthodox tradition of Romania. And of course, he was not outrageously active. He just was a member, But at the same time, he was part of this movement, which was, I repeat, that was the general movement in Europe at that time. Okay?
Yeah.
And he felt always uncomfortable about it. But look, we didn't finish the a point why we started talking about origin of his anti-Western feelings. But look, we move to 1960s, 1970s, and we see now on the left this tradition of anti-Western sentiments, anti-Western. This romantic tradition now was hijacked by the left.
Right.
Or in the interwar Europe, it was more widespread on the right, as vegetarianism, that nature lifestyle, nudism, naturism,
Right.
It's a healthier life, but organic things, So before it was more like, I would say, interwar Europe, or we could find these things on conservative, so-called right side.
Yeah, that's right.
Things shifted to the left. And that is why Eliade's books became popular among Western spiritual seekers, nature people, nature communities, the New Age communities, who are people of the left.
Right, right.
Environmentalism, which is the movement predominantly with left liberal sympathies. All these, they actually welcome books written by Eliade. See, it's interesting. Things changed,
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, absolutely.
It's simply because, see, in 1945, with defeat of National Socialism, the entire right tradition was kind of dismissed from Western discourse. Okay, and spiritual things and cultural things, they were developing, mutating on the left.
Mm-hmm.
Mainstream became left liberal, left of the center. That was the mainstream.
Yeah.
1945. Natural. What can you say?
Mm-hmm.
Of course, right now we see the changes. Now it's kind of goes in reverse to some extent. But that's how ideas develop, spiritual ideas. It's interesting to observe. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I do, absolutely. Because I know that, it's, as you were mentioning, the sort of all this sort of nudism and nature worship and vegetarianism was part of the Wandervogel movement in Germany in the late 19th century, right? And some of the members of that actually emigrated to California and brought vegetarianism with them and some yoga techniques with them. But that movement is considered to be really quite right wing, but obviously in a way it's also the seeds of the sort of very left wing hippie movement, which is not to say that the hippie movement was a sort of right wing movement. It obviously wasn't, but
no. This predominant majority of so-called hippie people, they were people of the left.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's curious how these things turn around, and in regard to traditionalism as well, although that's considered to be a very right-wing movement often. Then you also have someone like Prince Charles, who, I mean, he is conservative in a certain sense, but from another perspective, he would be considered to be way to the left of most people in Britain. Embracing all religions, environmentalism, and this kind of thing. So, yeah. Well, perhaps last of all, you could just give us your thoughts on why we're interested in shamanism and paganism and this kind of thing today, and what does it say about the state of our modern culture? Because Mircea Eliade was pretty critical of our modern culture and was actually critical of the occult in the West as well, and thought it was essentially a phony sort of tradition. But what's your take on all that?
Yeah, I disagree with him in this case.
Oh, really? Yeah.
I disagree because, again, it goes back to what I mentioned before. It's what is considered authentic and non-authentic. And of course, as traditionalist, he was right, because he wanted to kind of all recent inventions or kind of attempts to imitate or emulate somebody's spirituality.
Yeah.
Look to him some kind artificial.
Right.
But again, I shared this with you before, and I kind of stressed it before and want to stress again that for me, I'm a strong proponent of this, I would say, an open-minded view, to kind of take for granted what is going on, if it spiritually satisfies people,
Yeah.
we don't need to endorse it, but we have to acknowledge it. And if you have, for goodness sake, millions of people, thousands of people embracing something, like if you take Mormon Church, Joseph Smith, in 1830s, he was attacked viciously as a kind of phony, as a fraud,
Yeah.
It was, I guess, also New Age at that time. But
yes,
now,
very much, yeah.
A booming Mormon church that, by the way, with a very efficient system of mutual help.
Yeah.
Like other denominations that are bankrupt, literally bankrupt.
Yeah.
For me, it's I don't share this view that so-called New Age people, they're phony. I think they're creating new tradition. It's like we're witnessing the creation of the new tradition, and it's already established tradition. In fact, I accept a comment, one critical comment. I wrote a small essay on Tibetan Buddhism, arguing that intellectuals today are very much, especially college intellectuals, attracted to Buddhism.
Yeah.
They're very critical of, let's say, traditional mainstream Christianity, some Southern Baptism in the United States, which I understand and share in many respects. But at the same time, they begin to elevate Tibetan Buddhism as a kind of a new hope, a new kind of, which is fine, by the way, But what I don't accept is kind of when you diss one tradition and elevate another tradition, like it's much better, It's better for you, which is fine. So that's what I don't understand. And I wrote an essay about Tibetan Buddhism, and I kind of gave it a title. Maybe it's not a good title, like a new opium for intellectuals. Okay. And one reader left a critical remark. He said, "For goodness sake, this title could have sounded good and valid in 1970s, but now we have a booming American Tibetan Buddhism. It's already embedded in our culture." And he is absolutely right. Now we have 3 million Americans, Caucasians, Hispanics, blacks, who are American Tibetan Buddhists.
Yeah.
So I'm going to call them non-authentic, non-traditional. No, they're authentic, they're traditional. It's a branch of Tibetan Buddhism, which is here in the United States. 3 million people. Of course they're authentic, of course. If it brings them spiritual satisfaction, this is the tradition. So they are very traditional to me. That's how I view it. It's the same about shamanism. Shamanism, look, Michael Harner, who is the head of Foundation for Shamanic Studies, his let's call it School of Shamanism, 5,000 people on average graduate each year from his courses, from his School of Shamanism. Are we going to label all these people as phony? No, because they're spearheading this new tradition, which, if it brings them spiritual satisfaction, like drumming, shamanic drumming, if it helps them, why should we dismiss this?
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think, I have some traditionalist leanings in some respects, but I would say that one of the things that I do find very limiting about traditionalism is that it does always look to the past just a little bit too much, and in a certain sense is not very creative. I think that Prince Charles might be an exception to that, because he actually does quite a lot of different projects, but yeah, otherwise it's not terribly forward-looking, it has to be said.
Yeah, it's I understand this nostalgia, like a longing for authenticity. Eliade actually called it longing for paradise. Longing for primordial paradise. That's his expression.
Oh, really? Interesting.
He has an article, by the way, that titled something like this. Longing for this primordial paradise, something like this. I have to look it up. And it's a tradition. It's like nostalgia. We have to acknowledge this, I guess. It's also some people feel psychologically satisfies them, but again, which is fine, but what I don't understand, what these people begin to accuse or kind of ridicule so-called, I don't know, non-authentic, Are we going to ridicule or label American Tibetan Buddhism as some, as I said, as non-authentic. Of course not, you know. But at the same time, of course, it's a more recent invention than, let's say, Tibetan Buddhism in Tibet, right?
Right, of course, definitely.
Like, since, of course, what Saint Paul had created, you know, on the road from Damascus, you know,
right,
very different from Joseph Smith brought up in the ancient theories, you know? But both of them are Christianity, essentially. Both of them traditional, eh?
Right, in a certain sense, yeah.
Maybe again, I'm. I definitely have this view, and I kind of. I have a strong opinion about it.
Well, I think that might be a good place to wrap it up. So, Andrei, maybe you could just mention where people could learn more about you and what you're doing, and where they can buy your books and this kind of thing.
Yeah, all my books on Amazon.com. The book actually about shamanism, the beauty of the primitive. We shared some views before the interview that although I wrote this book as an academic volume, it's actually was read by other readers, not only academics, you know.
Yeah.
It surprised me, and it pleasantly surprised me. The title is The Beauty of the Primitive.
Great.
Shamanism and Western Imagination on Amazon.com. At the same time, I have I put together a huge anthology on shamanism, 3 volumes, description of shamanism from different parts of the world, the major excerpts from major works on shamanism, 3 volumes, but it's a very expensive book. At the same time, I invite people to visit my site on academia.edu, where you could see all my works in PDF, you know, including a table of contents for this anthology on shamanism, and you can see what particular works included into this expensive anthology, and then you can order them through interlibrary loan, you know.
Okay.
Free. Another thing, I have a video channel called Magus West. It's spelled as one word, or Magus West on YouTube. I also have different videos there on traditionalism, cultural studies on Tibetan Buddhism, on Western culture in general. So I welcome all listeners to go to either Amazon.com or to my YouTube channel or to Academia.edu and to familiarize themselves with my works.
Great, that's excellent. Thank you very much. And thanks very much for speaking to us. I appreciate it.
Your show, and good luck on your new project.
Thank you very much.